If there's one thing I've learned, it's that getting outside is always worth it, no matter the weather. Welcome to Humans Outside, where we're building a life around spending time in nature while learning from fascinating outdoor-minded guests. I'm Amy Bouchatz, a journalist originally from the beach in California, now working to love nature from my home in Alaska. Since September 2017, I've spent at least 20 consecutive minutes outside every single day, no matter what. Ready to hear from experts and outdoor lovers who make heading into nature just a part of who they are while we work to do the same? Let's go! For so many of us, nature makes the perfect escape. Sometimes we use it as a vacation escape. For me, it's a daily practice of taking the time to escape indoor pressures and distractions and center myself. We can also use it as a way to escape other kinds of life stresses like family or work. But nature also makes a great container, if you will, to work through the weight of choices we've made or traumas that chase us. And that includes those that come in the form of addiction. Today's guest, Emily Holland, personally works to use nature to pursue a life of sobriety while also spending time learning from others who are doing the same thing through her podcast, Nature Untold. Today, Emily is going to help us explore fleeing addiction and chasing sobriety with nature. Emily, welcome to Humans Outside.
Thanks for having me, Amy. Appreciate it.
So I am, like, what do they say? First time talking to you, long time fan.
I appreciate that. Yeah.
Yeah, and your podcast has been accompanying me on some long runs recently. So that's pretty fun. And another way we run away from stuff, literally by running. So there you go.
Absolutely.
And I know you've done run stuff in the past or currently, so maybe we'll talk about that. But before anything else, talk to us about your favorite outdoor place. We like to imagine ourselves having our conversation in our guest's favorite outdoor space, just like we're hanging out. I hope we're having a cup of coffee there, having this conversation somewhere outside. So where are we with you today?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I love that you frame up the conversation like that. So my favorite outdoor place of all time is any alpine lake that I can get to in the Rocky Mountains in the months of July or August, where it's really warm and you can get up there and sometimes take a dip if you're feeling adventurous, but it's usually surrounded by huge peaks around it. And it's always a beautiful spot to have a snack, watch my dog play in it, all those types of things. So that's absolutely my favorite outdoor space.
And an alpine lake's usually pretty far away from any other people, not a lot of going on there.
Important note, away from other people. That's a good note.
Quiet.
Absolutely.
Sometimes the water is pretty chilly.
Yes. Yeah. And that's good too. I mean, I've been diving, no pun intended, into a little bit more of some cold water dips in order to help regulate some of my anxieties and depressive tendencies. And I don't know if there is any science-based thing that is getting me there, but you know what? I feel really good after I jump into a cold body of water. So I'm just going to go with it.
Yeah. If nothing else, it distracts you from, literally everything else. So
yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, because all you can think about is how cold you are now and why, and then really like a personal exploration in a brief moment as to what made you do that right then. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I met someone recently. It was just like a friend's girlfriend, and they were doing a dip in this like tiny creek where we were camping one day, and she just like sprinted into the river, and she was like, "You just gotta not think and dive in." And I was like, I got a chance. So I've been thinking about that statement over and over again every time I do a dip, but also just like as I'm going careening towards a new part of my life and just trying to think about her and that statement as I move forward.
Yeah, it's broadly applicable. I like it.
Yes.
Okay, so talk to us about how you became someone who likes to go outside. What's your outdoor journey? How do we get to
Yeah.
like a spot where we're careening into cold alpine lakes? What happened?
Yeah, no, something there's a lot of crazy things that happen to get to that. No, so I grew up in upstate New York, and a lot of people, when I say I'm from New York, they're like, "Oh, the city," and that is so far from the truth from my experience. Upstate New York is, first of all, huge for people who are not familiar with the Northeast, and also really beautiful outdoor spaces. So I grew up sort of in the foothills, I would say, of the Adirondack Mountains, which are a really beautiful Appalachian mountain range. And I grew up on a Christmas tree farm, actually, in upstate New York. So learned from an early age to really like work with my hands. You know, me and my sisters worked on the farm to help my parents and getting our hands dirty, getting fertilizer on every tree, taking care of nature around us. My mom has a huge garden, and so she kind of instilled that in us. I didn't at the time really enjoy it, but I learned later on that that was something that's very healing. And then also, we did a lot of camping, boating, hiking, and my mom very much instilled in us from an early age that nature was healing because she would take us on like these nature walks literally just in our backyard and establish like what types of plants were there and like do sort of these discovery walks with us when we were really young. So that's how it started. And then like a lot of kids and angsty teens and college students, I was like, get me the hell out of my hometown and get me to some cities and experiencing new things. And I moved away from going into the outdoors, and then came back to it later in well, my early 20s,
Hmm.
and realized it would be a really crucial part of my life and kind of what I wanted to center my life around.
Hmm. Hmm. And you got into content creation and podcasting and all of that good stuff in that. So how do you go from, oh, outside, good stuff, to I think I'm going to do this as a job?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the entire time that I have been content creating up until 2 weeks ago, I have had a full-time job separately.
Hmm.
So it's been a long, slow burn of a journey. But I started going outside and I started just having like really profound moments out there in which I felt like I was really coming back into myself and I was like healing certain parts of my past that I really wanted to heal. And I started also going up into the outdoors with my now partner a lot more. And so there was all this like growth that was happening and I was just feeling like really reflective. So I started just naturally writing about my experiences outdoors. And through that process, I sort of met someone, his name is Jonathan Ronzio, and we started working together, or I started working for him rather, writing a couple of blogs here and there for his company Explore Inspired. And then we started to work together a little bit more closely and we started doing some podcast production on the Stokecast, which is a podcast rather, that interviews outdoor entrepreneurs and athletes and
Hmm.
advocates. And that was really amazing. And I was able to talk to a lot of like my heroes in the outdoor space in this podcast long form interview way. And I'm sure you can resonate with this. Is like having a podcast is anyone can do it, but it's also like a ton of work
Oh,
and
yes.
not always communicated that it is so much work. And at the same time, it's like my selfish excuse to have really intimate conversations with someone that I just want to talk to.
Oh, yes.
So all of that coming together to create just like I wanted to go full time into content creation, into being more involved in storytelling. And so, yeah, I quit my corporate job a couple weeks ago and now I really am in it now.
Oh,
So,
congratulations.
yeah, thank you. I appreciate it.
That's a really scary leap.
Yes.
Not unlike other scary leaps that we take in our lives. So that we're going to talk about here today. So I totally
Mm.
appreciate that. Okay, so speaking of the things we're going to talk about here today, in early 2020, you decided to make a pretty big life change to focus on sobriety. So give us a snapshot, if you don't mind, into your journey to that point. What, like,
Yeah.
how do we go from, I live in life to, like making that decision and then really leaning into it?
Yeah. Well, I know, and I always ask this, right, of other people that I'm interviewing, and it's always interesting because it's like cramming 15 years of alcohol abuse into, like a
Mm.
3-minute story. But basically, the long and short of it is that I started drinking very young. I was 14 when I started drinking. And I never really stopped. And I used it as a numbing agent. I used it to feel confident, to feel sexy, to feel cool. I used it in like every aspect of my life. And as I started going into the outdoors more again, I started to feel more of myself. Whereas when I was drinking a lot and moved away from the outdoors when I was a teenager and early 20s, I just felt like I was watching someone else's life and like I wasn't
Mm.
living my own life.
Mhm.
Yeah. And so in that time period, when I started going into the outdoors again, I'm like learning how to trust my body. I'm learning how to feel feelings totally. I'm learning how to heal things and with the help of therapy. So with those couple years after I started going back into the outdoors, I started naturally like moving away from alcohol. I was still drinking, but not to the extent at all as I was in my teen and early 20 years, where I was like blacking out every single weekend, driving drunk all the time, like making incredibly dangerous decisions. And so I started to move away from alcohol, and I started doing like dry months here and there. So I'd do like a dry
Mm.
January every year. And then sometimes I would do like a dry August or just random breaks from alcohol. And I said, I think 2.5 years ago or more, I think eventually I'm not going to drink anymore. But
Mm.
I didn't feel ready to do it at the time. And so once I moved to Colorado in mid 2019, started going back to therapy, had a really great therapist who was helping me through some stuff. And with that, and then just really wanting to like fully build a life that I really, really was excited to live, I decided at the beginning of 2020, I'm going to do this dry month again. And then after that dry month of January 2020, I had like one drink on February 1st,
Mhm.
a Truly seltzer, and and I it immediately altered my mood. It made me feel out of control, and it just put me in sort of a spiral of like picking fights with my partner and that kind of stuff. So I had tried again to moderate. Like I had another drink, I think 2 or 3 times, like one at a time. Um, and I just hated how it was making me feel. And I decided that I was going to stop and I was going to give myself a quarter. So I was going to give myself 3 months to not drink at all and then sort of see where I was at that point. And I mean, I'm like nearing a year and a half at this point. And I don't see myself drinking again in the future, but I'd never say I will never drink again because I do not know what life will hand me. And I don't want to put so much pressure on myself that it causes this whole other issue
Right.
around. So that's sort of the long and short of it into the journey to get to the decision to stop.
Okay, so 2020, January, interesting timing for deciding to, who
Yeah.
knew? It's just
Yeah.
like, obviously we didn't know.
Yeah.
That's really like, in retrospect, difficult time to put the pause button on something that, gives you comfort in ways or makes you feel better or whatever, right? Like whatever
Mm.
alcohol does for you or the iterations of what it does or doesn't do for you. Uh, Early 2020 wasn't a great time to put that challenge on yourself, or maybe it was a great time, but it was certainly a harder time. So I'm wondering how COVID played into your ability to keep that. Like, did it make it harder? Did it make it
Mm.
easier? Um, I could see it going both ways. So talk to us about that.
Yeah, I'll definitely speak from my experience because I know a lot of people really struggled last year with substance abuse and with their sobriety as well. So I know you're right; it could go either way. My experience was that I was really ready to be done with it. And
Mm,
so I just felt like the timing actually didn't totally matter I mean, of course the pandemic timing mattered, but not for my
right.
sobriety. In fact, I think it was actually pretty helpful because a lot of the early struggles that I had heard of with sobriety were like, um, going to the bar for the first time with your friends and not drinking with them while they're drinking around you, or
Right.
like going skiing for the first time, or mountain biking, whatever, whatever you're tied to. And so I just felt like it was a really good time for me to stop. And I still had a month, I think, in between really when I stopped and when everything shut down on like, what was it, like March 13th or whatever the like hollow date was. But I had a ski trip in there that I had gone on with friends who were all drinking. I had, multiple like date nights with my partner who does still drink as well. Like I had some things under my belt that were okay. So the first couple of months, was okay. And I was okay with also just like taking a break and not being super busy all the time. And that helped me just have more space to reflect on what I was trying to do with the sobriety piece. And then there were a few moments when the holidays came that I didn't anticipate being as hard as they were really,
Mm.
where, for Thanksgiving, for example, me and my partner, it was just the two of us. We couldn't go home to see our families because that's when, as you know, everything like spiked again around the
Mhm.
holidays.
Mhm.
Um, and so that was really like one of the most hard days I think I've had, because I was really tempted to drink because I was just super sad. And that, and then the election cycle last year was very stressful. And there was that week of like, election day to that Saturday morning where everything was called, where I was like maniacally checking CNN like every two
Right.
seconds to try to
Right.
figure out like what's going on. And so at the end of that, where we learned what the results were, a lot of other people had this opportunity to release through alcohol, and I didn't feel like I had a release.
Mhm.
And so
Mhm.
I actually, that was a great opportunity for me to reflect on why was that hard for me, and then, go into the outdoors to help kind of release some of that.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. I mean I really resonate with that. I am not I am, as you know, I'm also I also don't drink. I stopped in August of 2019 because I felt like alcohol didn't fit my goals.
Mm,
Um, and I felt like I was being pressured into doing something I didn't want to do in a social setting. But I will say also alcohol, excuse me, I will say also alcohol, specifically beer, is an easy way to make you care a little bit less about something stressful. So,
yeah, it's
um,
easy until it isn't, right?
it's
Though,
easy until it
because
isn't, right. Well,
yes,
what I mean by
yeah.
that is it feels like the easy button. And so the
Hmm.
times that I have felt the most pressure, or the most like internal desire to break that, are around these stressful events like you're talking about, right? So like
Yeah.
when work gets really really stressful, and it's a lot, and I think if I had a beer right now I would care about this way less, like
Yeah.
and that would be good for me, right? Like from an emotional standpoint, we could all do for me to care about this less than I do. And it reminds me of the scene in Friends where Ross is really uptight about his sandwich, and he is like medicated essentially by a doctor, and he notes something to the effect of, well, I definitely don't care about my sandwich. And and that's kind of the vibe that I'm going for here, right? So those are the times that are stressful, that are tempting for me rather, to come off of that, is when I feel like this is a very very stressful situation. The world's imploding, or my family is
Mm,
stressing me out, or a job is too stressful and I want to take a step back. But you're absolutely right, it also offers that opportunity for me to look at why am I here right now, because I'm not tempted to drink any other time. So
yeah.
what's going on with me that I'm like, the only solution to this is a beer? And it's not the
Right.
only solution, right? There are other solutions. And what are they? And let's go ahead and use some of those. It's like,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if there's nothing else in life, like the thing that you have is yourself, and why not take every opportunity that you can to learn about yourself, to know
yeah.
yourself, to really dive into who you are and why you are reacting to certain things a certain way, or why you want certain things, or whatever, like that is one of the most beautiful things about life is continuous exploration of self. And so I think that Do I think everyone needs to be sober? That's everyone else's decision. But do I
Right.
think this is a great opportunity for me personally to just continue to know myself more and more and more? Absolutely.
Yeah, so I want to talk a lot about nature and how it has what it has to do with this, which you've touched on a little bit. But before we do that, can you talk to us a little bit about what sobriety is, what it's not, why it's not just not drinking or not doing substances, why it's broader than that? I guess I'm going to asking
Mm.
is how do you define sobriety, in your work on your podcast, and in your discussions with people who are coming at it from all angles?
Yeah. So this is an interesting question because I personally don't have a definition for all of sobriety. I have my own definition, and that's what I ask people too, because what I think is important that I've learned and that people don't often understand if they're not totally in the space or don't have any experience with it is that everyone's journey is really, really different. Although there is some things that are super connected, very resonant or along all different types of journeys, everyone's journey is different. And because of that, there needs to be different definitions for sobriety. And whatever someone thinks makes sense for them as far as sobriety is what makes sense for them.
Mm.
And no one else can tell them differently, right? So that's just, I'll say that as sort of a disclaimer up front. So for me, right now, and this might change, sobriety means I don't drink alcohol. I don't drink alcohol. I still take CBD. I'm not opposed to utilizing THC for therapeutic modalities. I'm not opposed to those things. Do I use them in everyday life? No, but I don't drink alcohol, and that's my main thing. Now, I think eventually my definition of sobriety for myself will change in that it may be more of like things that take me out of my integrity or
Mm.
something along those lines. But I'm just not at that place yet. And that's totally fine too. And I think that's another point that I'd like to make is that it may change with what's helpful for you at the time and the way that you want to define it. So yeah, that's for me the definition that I would utilize at the moment.
What do you hear in terms of the folks who come on your podcast? What
Mm-hmm.
definitions do they use?
Yeah, some folks will say no drugs, no alcohol at all. That's my hard and fast definition. Some folks will say some are sober curious, right? So they'll say sobriety for me is just about, like I said before, continuous learning about self. It's about continuous exploration of self. Or someone will say sobriety for me is means that I don't utilize anything that would help me numb myself
Mm.
to experiences. So it really does run the gamut. And then some folks are, love and sex addicts or codependents. And so for them, sobriety is continuous boundary setting. It's continuous unpacking of past traumas that led them to where they are. So it really is all over the place. And I think that traditionally, not just in the outdoor realm, but in the general like United States culture and maybe even North America, um, we think about sobriety as this thing that people have to do because they're addicts. And we think about like jail cells, we think about AA circles, and we think about like, people on the street, right? Like people who
Hmm.
have gone so far that they, are homeless now and all these like pretty dramatized experiences. And those are still incredibly true. But there's a lot more people that are who don't resonate with that and that's not their experience. And I think that if we offer more opportunities for people to see that these experiences are varied and all of them are important at the same time, then more people will feel seen and heard and hopefully make decisions that are better for their own health and or sobriety.
I appreciate this broadening of the definition of sobriety to include all of those different walks because I think when we talk about addiction, a couple of things. One, it can seem like someone else's problem, like something
Mm-hmm.
does not only does not impact you personally, but does not impact anyone you know, which I
Yeah.
think we can all agree is probably not true, right? Like part of addiction is hiding it.
Yep.
I at least, in fact, somebody on your podcast was talking about creating a family tree of addiction in their family. And so I listened to this while I was running, which I say to mean I had a lot of time on my hands. Okay.
Yeah.
And so I started envisioning, but not a lot of paper. Okay, so I started envisioning this family tree of mine, and whoa, boy, howdy. Okay,
Hmm.
and and that was true, especially if I broadened the definition of addiction to not just alcohol, not And then the other thing is that we are pigeonholed in how we think about these things because of popular media.
Yes.
Because we see Don Draper cradling his martini, because we see this sort of glorification of these different types of addictions and then how people deal with them. And it makes talking about them um, available, right? It's no longer taboo to talk about this stuff, which is great. Okay. But then because we don't talk about other types of addictions or other types of sobriety, we think about them in the framework of that one definition. So
Hmm.
oh, gambling and alcohol. Well, everyone's, like, that's totally normal, right?
Yeah.
And that just means you don't drink, right? And you go to AA, and then we know what that looks like because we saw it on This Is Us, and all that stuff, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, which is, again, like, there are pros and cons to that, but it's also important to stop and say what you're being presented with may not be the broadest or even the most accurate picture of what we're talking about here and how this can impact you.
Totally. Yeah. And I think it goes even beyond that. Like, I'm just all about the idea of nuance since I started this podcast because
Mm,
there's no black and white experience that's like, this is the correct experience that you must have to become sober. There's
yeah.
no answer to that. And that can be really scary, I think, for folks, but it also could be super empowering because you are in control unless you have obviously like a physical dependence where other parts of the medical community
Right.
need to come into that, but you are in control of the way that you go down this path for
Mm,
the most part, and that is really empowering, and to move people from thinking that the only reason someone doesn't drink is because they're an addict and they crash their car and whatever.
right.
People to move to an idea of, instead of, well, I can't drink, well, I don't want to drink, or I have to be sober to I get to be sober. Those types of changes to
Mm,
terminology can be really crucial for folks to think about it in just a little bit of a newer way. And not only if they're just struggling themselves, but also if they have anyone anywhere has someone in their community that's currently struggling with something right now in the addiction or substance abuse space. Guaranteed. Every
yeah.
single person. And so anytime you can be a little bit better of a community member by having more empathy and compassion for different experiences, that's a win for me.
Yeah, and what you're saying, though, translates also to how we use nature. It's a mistake to pigeonhole um our ability or someone else's ability to use nature by our definition. It's a mistake
Right.
to say, oh, like, you're not going on a backpacking trip, well, you're not really going outside.
Yeah.
And of course that's not true. So there's all sorts of broad broad applications to what you're saying about that. Hey humans, just a quick break to ask for a huge favor. If you're loving this episode, could you take a second to give us 5 stars or a great rating and review in whatever podcast platform you use? Those ratings help other humans find the podcast too and spread that humans outside love around the world. I can't thank you enough for listening and sharing your support through a rating and review. Now, back to the episode. Okay, so speaking of nature, we don't always think about sobriety and nature as being linked. I would say we don't think about sobriety and like, not always, but like, that's not a thing.
Yeah.
So, but you do, and it's in, your podcast is premised on this. So what does sobriety have to do with going outside?
Yeah, I think the way that this came about was just thinking about my own sobriety, and then I consider myself part of like the outdoor community and the outdoor industry at large. And so I was looking around for consistent stories being told in a consistent media or platform, um, and I couldn't find it that were
Mhm.
telling varied stories of varied types of outdoor community members, meaning someone, to your point, who's going on a backpacking trip, cool, but also someone who like walks their dog along the creek on a daily basis. Like that person is just as part of the outdoor community as someone who's going to summit Everest, in my opinion.
Totally.
And so I just didn't see a lot of people telling their stories in our communities. And at the same time, especially in the Mountain West, there's a really high percentage of mental health issues in the Mountain West and a high percentage of addiction and also suicide. And so I was starting to see this connection of, okay, well, I think that there's more people who struggle with this than we know about. Why don't we know
Mhm.
about them? Obviously, there's stigmas attached. And could we tell stories? Could we allow them to tell their stories in long form interviews? And that's why I started it. And I think that the way in which I've learned about sobriety through this podcast is through how people are healing. And much of that is through their experiences outdoors. And so that can totally be a bunch of different things, right? Some people love skiing. They love like backcountry skiing. Awesome. Some people love mountain biking. Some people love hiking. But all of these people, what they have in common if they're going into the outdoors is that they have a sense of seeking. They know that the
Mm.
world is bigger than just them. And that is a self awareness, or I guess a more global awareness that not every population has. And so people who are in the recovery space and outdoorsy have this really unique perspective where they're incredibly intuitive seekers. They're always, I'm like blown away by every conversation I have with these folks because, first of all, they're not like media trained. They're people who are like you and me, right? Like they're just out there
Mhm.
doing their thing. Um, and they're just so thoughtful and profound. And that just like I'm getting a little choked up just thinking about it. But that connective tissue of the person who seeks and then also adding in this other aspect of recovery, sober curiosity, sobriety overall. I mean, it's just a really profound thing. It's a profound type of conversation to have. And also, there's just not enough conversations about this at large, and especially in the outdoor industry where we go to all these trade events and there's happy hours starting at 2 p.m. at every single trade booth and no options for anyone who's sober. They literally don't even have bottles of water sometimes at these places. So like you're working in this like juxtaposition of an industry that really values alcohol, it seems, from what they're projecting on the outside, and then also the people in it who are struggling and sometimes sick and kept that way because they think it's the norm and they think it's what they should be doing.
Right, right, totally. Um, do you think there's a compelling case for sobriety for people who want to center themselves on being closer to using nature more so than other people? I don't know, because we're lifting a fog, or is this just one group of users?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, I think there's a compelling case for sobriety for anyone. So
Mm-hmm.
I'll just say that. I think that one other thing to note that, again, like kind of goes back to nuance is like, yes, we are all healing in the outdoors, but outdoors and nature itself is not going to heal you and by itself, right? So I think that certainly people who are already going into the outdoors, they have that like kind of gear in place where sobriety would probably aid their experiences in the outdoors and aid their healing out there. And then there's the other side of that where there's a lot of groups of people who are in recovery who go through programs or are part of like sober living houses or treatment centers that have connections with these nonprofit groups that take people outside to help them with the recovery. And that the way that nature can be super metaphorical in that way, like climbing, for example, it's like 1 foot at a time,
Mhm.
like that
Mhm.
kind of thinking, or even hiking in itself, like helping you ground yourself. You know, there's so many metaphors in nature that people who are already sober or trying to be in recovery could tap into a new part of themselves that they didn't even know existed through, going into the outdoors, sometimes for the first time. So there's sort of the people who are already in the outdoor space, who are really into nature, tapped into it, and they're sober. And then there's people who are in recovery or wanting to be in recovery on the other side, who have yet to go into the outdoors and who I think would really benefit from that sort of metaphorical experience in nature.
Have you been surprised by the number of nature-minded people who are in a sobriety journey?
Yes. When I posted in a large Facebook group that has all the basically outdoor industry folks in it. There's like 25,000 people. I got like hundreds of comments of people who are ready to be interviewed. And since then, people just like slide me names every like week. I get a couple more names of people like, oh, you should reach out to this person. You should reach out to this person. And
Hmm.
I never knew about any of that. Like I didn't have any of those examples. And some of them have been interviewed for certain things here and there, but not anywhere that I have seen before I started doing this. So I think it is surprising. And I think because it's so surprising, that is a testament that there's still a huge stigma around it. And I'm unpacking that, but also as an industry and community, we need to unpack it even more.
Hmm. So, what's the most powerful tool heading nature into nature rather gives for sobriety that you've learned so far, either from your own journey or from interviewing these people who you've just been talking about?
Mm. I think the idea or the ability to be present, like that is the thing that gets totally unlocked from going
Hmm.
into nature in sobriety. Things I never noticed before. I mean, I'm out here like naming different types of birds now. Like I look at all the flowers. Like I'm like everything warrants my attention, and in a great way when I'm outside. Like I feel like before I was just like trudging it out and like working alcohol out of my body and like trying to, only go outside to like stay in shape. And whereas now I feel like this really a much deeper connection with nature in general. And the time that I spend outside, I feel I have so much more of a present mindset, where before you just don't have as much brain space when you are consumed by a substance. Like it's even if you're taking a break from it, you're like, okay, well, I can't drink today and I want to drink tomorrow, but I'm not going to drink on that day. And this event I'm going to go to, but I'm only going to have 2 drinks. And you're like constantly thinking about it, even if you're not even around it. And
Right,
so it just
right.
opens up all this brain space for you to like feel wonder about the world and like be amazed by the nature around you. And again, that can be an alpine lake like we're sitting at right now, or it can be the creek that I ran on the bike path earlier with my dog and just like staring at the little bubbling creek. So it's just like this present mindset that is becomes a big tool in nature that sobriety has given me that I definitely didn't have that before.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we've talked about a bunch of different tools, like you were just mentioning. I'm wondering if we can give people 3 or 4 succinct tips, maybe that you've learned about sobriety on your journey or from the people you've interviewed, to take away from with them after listening to this, so that they can lean into sobriety outside. We
Mhm.
spent a lot of time talking about the why today, so let's talk about a little bit about the how,
Yeah.
um, and give some folks some action items.
Yeah, I love that. So, the first thing I would recommend, if possible, if you're not physically dependent on a substance, and we can talk about that as well, but is to take a break.
Hmm.
So, this is primarily from alcohol, but if you have a love and sex addiction, this is also very relevant. So, it's taking a break. I often say, like, drive ons are awesome because you learn something one way or another. You learn that you want to get rid of this thing out of your life for however long you want it to. I'd never say forever, as I mentioned.
Mm.
Or you learn, okay, I feel that I need alcohol all the time. I can't stop drinking. That's a good thing to learn. And then at the end of that, you have all this new data about yourself to be able to go forth and be like, okay, maybe I need to get therapy for this thing because it's coming up a lot
Right.
as I'm sober, or maybe I need to, find a sober community in my local area because I don't know a lot of people who are sober. So all of those things you're learning just from taking a little bit of time off from whatever the thing is that you feel addicted to or dependent on. So that's the first thing I would say. The second thing I would say is much like what you kind of preach on this podcast is get outside every damn day. Doesn't matter what you're doing. You could be a long trail run like you were talking about, but like I follow you on Instagram and I know that there's sometimes it's like hot tub time and that's cool too. Like
Oh, there's so
anytime.
much hot tub time.
Yeah, but like
All hot tub time, not pictured.
yeah. So that's it though, right? It's like get outside every day. If you need some literature, if you're like a science minded person, I know you had Florence Williams, I believe her name is, who
Mhm.
wrote Nature Fix on the show. That's a great book to read. So you have sort of like this data to tell you like why it is so good for you to go outside. So that's the second thing I would say. The third thing I would say is find a community that speaks to you. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of different communities out there that are kind of targeting different types of individuals when it comes to sobriety or sober curiosity. And that's awesome. I'm all for that. You can't see it, but two of my thumbs are up right now. But you got to find the one that speaks most closely to how you feel and what you identify with, right? So for some people, that is AA, that's, SLA, which is sex and love Anonymous, and then NA. There's all of the A's. You could go to any of those communities for whatever ails you. Then there's things like the Luckiest Club, which is a virtual membership where it's all about sobriety, generally from alcohol. All different types of sort of like affinity groups in that. Sobriety Instagram is also a great place to just tap into. There's tons of sober accounts that have virtual meetups, in-person meetups, all kinds of stuff like that. The Tempest is a great organization. So just finding these communities that really speak to you, right? Like AA is awesome and it's helped tons of people get sober, but it's not for everyone. And neither is like some of these other options. So just finding the
Mm-hmm.
thing that is for you, I think is best. And then for me, I mean, I always recommend as we're going through this to have a therapist, but that is dependent on, if you like therapy, if you want to go to therapy, just find something in which you can have some sort of level of support as you go through, especially like the first couple months.
Yeah. Yeah, having that support is so key for anything,
Yeah.
when you're making a new habit or when you're ditching a habit, as it were, or making a new habit around ditching a habit. I think that's the thing.
Yeah,
So
you nailed it.
yeah. So, but that group of people around you who are moving in the same direction and who can even just hitting that like button on Instagram can be a form of support, So
Yeah.
while actual humans that or can talk to are a big deal and definitely something you should look into, and co-signed, by the way, on the therapist suggestion. Also sharing your journey and being open and authentic. And you noted earlier how you were shocked by how many people came out of the woodwork who are dealing with this problem. And I think that is pertinent to the accountability discussion as well, because when you start being authentic about something like this, you're going to find that there are people who are walking this journey too, who maybe they didn't reach out and say, hey, this is me as well, but now that you're giving them the gift of your authenticity so that they can
Yeah.
see that that's true. And now, what do you know? You have a buddy on the journey, which is really helpful to know that you're not the only crazy person out there who decided that even though all of your friends look like they're having a blast drinking beers on the top of a mountain, that's not for you.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think also like with the sharing thing, I mean, I don't go to AA, but there's a lot of tenets of AA that I think are really great. Just like there's a lot of things in the Bible that I think are really great, but I don't go to church. So with that, like with
Mm,
AA, one of the tenets is to be of service to others. And not everyone is ready to share their journey. I'm so understanding of that. Sure. And when you're ready, do share if you can. But when you do share, you don't even know the level of impact that you have on someone. You have no idea because no one really, I mean, a lot of people don't reach out and say, like, hey, because you posted this one post, I now do this. And this is, so the more that you can share your journey, it keeps accountability
right.
for you, but it also has this really widespread effect that you'll never know the true meaning of, but that you can know deep down inside that it is helping other people. Some of them will come out of the woodwork, some of them never will, and that's okay. But that's a way that you can also like be of service to others if you're ready to share.
Totally. Oh, so good. I hope that us talking about this serves that purpose for some folks today who are
Same.
listening. Uh,
Same.
because that is, guys, I have to say, like, I don't regret giving up alcohol. I've talked
Mm-mm.
about this a little bit before. I gave up beer. I have not had, I maybe have had one sip of beer, like some sipped my husband's beer at some point. I don't think
Mm-hmm.
so though. Um, and I decided that after a year of no alcohol at all, over a year actually of no alcohol, I decided that the only thing I missed that was not a crutch, like it wasn't a I miss this right now because I'm having a hard day and wouldn't it be nice to kick back? It was more like this is festive and I kind of enjoyed it. Was having like boozy hot chocolate at Christmas.
Yeah.
And so I was
So
like,
good.
yeah,
Yeah.
I was like, like this is a perfectly legitimate reason for me to say don't drink, but I am going to have boozy alcohol at or boozy hot chocolate, on Christmas Day. That sounds fine. Um,
Yes.
listen, I had my boozy hot chocolate on Christmas and it made me feel so sick. It gave me an immediate headache. I was like,
Yeah.
this is disgusting. It does not, I do not feel like I'm having fun. I feel like I have a headache. Zero
Mm.
stars.
I love
And
that. I love that
I
you're
don't think I'm going to do
sharing.
that. Like, I don't,
Yes.
yeah. Like, what? I mean, that did nothing for me. It did not make my holiday more festive. No.
I know, and isn't it funny though? I mean, especially with the holidays, you're so connected. Like, I really wanted red wine with our lasagna we had on Thanksgiving, and I was like, oh
Yeah.
gosh, it's so good. But I love the way Ruby Warrington, who wrote a book called Sober Curious, which I
Hmm.
think is a really like helpful book for people who are thinking about maybe trying sobriety out a little bit. She is sober curious. She still calls herself that, but she doesn't like the terminology relapses, which I don't really like that either as a really negative connotation to it. She
Hmm.
when she has like a drink of alcohol, which is not often, she says, "Oh, that was a reminder for me. I don't
Yeah.
really want that." Yeah, and but that's okay. And you need reminders in every other aspect of your life of what you like and what you don't like and what's good for you and what's bad for you. So, unless it's like physical dependence, that's also like that's part of the journey for a lot of folks. And that's totally okay. And I'm so glad you shared that because people are like really hesitant to share that kind of stuff. And I think that's really important for people to hear that it doesn't need to be, again, this black and white thing.
Yeah. I have to say I was a little sad though, because I had been like, I'd spent like all this, I went through the first Christmas,
Mm.
missing this thing that I thought I wanted. So I spent like a year being like, on Christmas Day, I am going to have hot chocolate with Irish cream in it. It's going to be so much fun. And it was not fun. It was major letdown. Anyway,
Yeah.
but now we know, so we can move
Yeah.
on. Yeah, that's just how it goes. All right. So we've come to the end of our time together. I love to hear recommendations from guests at the end of our time on just sort of like your favorite and most essential outdoor gear since we're all outdoor users. I have actually heard some of recommendations for some of my most favorite things in this section. And like I'll think about it for a while and then I go out and get me one and it like life changing. Perfect example is the Kula cloth, which I've
Mm.
talked about before and would never have heard of that probably had someone not recommended it. And so, yeah. So, what are your favorite and most essential outdoor gear items? tell us.
Yes. Oh my gosh, I have so many that I could say, so I might say a couple. So my favorite piece of outdoor gear is my trail running vest from Patagonia. It's like literally beat up, but I love it because it has like these expandable pockets on the outside, like a lot of trail running vests do, but it's a 2 liter
Mm,
pack. So it's actually
nice.
like pretty big, so I can go on hikes with it, long hikes with it as well, and not just trail running. And so that one is my all-time fave. It has so many pockets. I'm a big fan of pockets. So that's like my all-time fave. I would say my newest piece of gear that I'm like really loving, it's kind of frivolous, is this small lantern from UST Gear. And it's like this collapsible lantern that like has like a carabiner on it basically, and it can just, light up your outside picnic table if you're camping, or it can like hook into your like, I used a car camp 2 nights ago and I put it on my car camping hook thing. And that one is like so nice, and it has 3 settings so you can like do mood lighting. So that one's great. Most essential, I have to say, and this might gross a couple people out, but I don't really care. So, so we got to talk about it. We're trail runners, so we have to be able to talk about poop. So I have a trowel, a little shovel. It's like less than an ounce, I think, and I bring it with me on trail runs because I've had experiences in the past where I've had to go and I didn't have anything to dig a hole with me, which is how you do leave no trace with poops. So that is probably my most essential because, trail running, it loosens stuff up for you, and you gotta go and you gotta go. And so that
And the
essential.
struggle is real. That I'll just leave
Oh,
it at that.
yes.
Because
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, because I think we could go to a place that people don't want to hear about right now, but co-signed.
We'll do it
So
offline with some seltzers or something. Yeah.
yeah, that's right. That's
Yeah.
right. I love me a bubbly. In fact,
Yeah.
get what, like, total side note, but I spend way more money on bubbly than I ever did on beer. Like,
Oh, preach. Yes,
so,
absolutely. It's
let's talk
like
about
kind of
that.
problematic. Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
Oh
Exactly.
my goodness. All right. So that's a racket, and they've totally
Yeah.
got my number, and I'm not even mad. Okay.
Yeah.
So final thing, we like to walk out of our podcast imagining ourselves with our guests where they in sort of their favorite outdoor moment, just sort of cap it off. Like, think of it as your happy place. Think about it as something that you just really love to revisit in your mind. But when you close your eyes and just picture your favorite outdoor moment ever, where are you? What are you doing?
Yeah, I have to say it's up in the Wind River Range in Wyoming. And when we first moved out here, we went and did a backpacking trip in what's called the Cirque of the Towers up there. And, I hadn't done much backpacking. I had done a little bit here and there, but I hadn't done anything to the level that we were doing at the, elevation or anything like that. And I mean, there was a moment in which you kind of you're on this loop and you're coming up over Texas Pass the way that we went. And after Texas Pass is basically like this cirque of towers. So it's a circle of huge rock
Mm.
towers around you. And of course, an alpine lake right in the middle. And so I come up over this, and like we had been living in Colorado less than 2 months at that point. And I was just so excited to live in the West. And I come up over this, and I literally just like started crying because in front of me was this alpine lake and these huge rock spires and incredibly green grass on the bottom of this like floor of the circle. And so we hiked down into the cirque, and there's little rivers running all throughout and little like vermin, little cute vermin running throughout. And we get down to in front of the lake, and it's just an enormous field of flowers in front of this lake
Mm.
and green grass. And I just sat there with my beautiful partner and my beautiful silly rescue dog with her little pack on. And I just thought to myself, I'm like, I cannot believe we get to see this, that we get to live this life. And I will never forget that. And I've been back there again last summer. I'll probably go again this summer because it was the moment where I realized, like, what my life could really be. And it was at a freaking alpine lake to really take us right back to the beginning of this conversation.
So beautiful. I can imagine myself there, and I hope listeners can as well. Emily, thank you so much for sharing your journey and the lessons you've learned with us today on Humans Outside.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It was a blast, and I love what you're doing with the show and the 20 minutes every day. Super important, as we talked about. So thanks so much.
Well, thanks for listening to this week's episode of Humans Outside. If you've enjoyed this episode, why not give us a little love and leave a rating and review to make it easier for other listeners to find the podcast too? It really does make a difference. Until next time, we'll see you out there.